$500,000 in a stabilization reserve, $500,000 in OPEB are exactly the same. Nationwide, medical expenses have been comparatively low compared to what we have seen in the past. The rate increases have not been significant. We've seen, an era of 3, 4, 5% increases. We're not seeing the 10, 12, 15% increases we've seen in the past. So then the question comes, why? Now, some people will tell you that we've bent the cost curve, we've solved all the problems, it's unicorns and rainbows, and life is great. And let's all hope that's the case. However, other people will tell you it's called drugs coming off of patent. It's called there's a recession and people are less likely to use care. There's a lot of reasons that it could be. So my point being is, before everybody decides, all right, we've got a new world now, healthcare costs have moderated, we can start spending money in a lot of other places, I guess I'd want to see more before we start jumping on that bandwagon. And again, it's up to you guys to decide what you want to do, but I would just tell you, I personally haven't totally bought into the excuse. And I say that because in the early 90s, we saw a very similar thing. Basically, they put in HMOs for the first time in any significant fashion. It had cost containment. We saw several years of fairly flat premiums. And then everybody complained about the cost containment mechanisms. Well, why do I have to go to a primary care physician? Why can't I just see a specialist? Why can't I do this? And Congress passed various laws saying that HMOs couldn't do those things anymore. And then we saw 12 to 15% increases again. Well, now you hear a lot of people complaining about the narrow networks in the quote-unquote exchanges. We will see what Congress does this time. Do they cave to the pressure of narrow networks and take away the cost controls? Or do they let the cost controls stay? We shall see. As far as future costs, you guys have about 250 people today taking benefits, currently getting paid out. Over the next 25 years or so, we expect that number to go to about 370 people before starting to level out. The employer share is going to go from about 991,000 to about 8.42 million over the next 40 years. Then the question is, $8 million, what? We can't afford $8 million. Well, the key element is, that's in 2053. In today's dollars, that's 1.82 million. So if you think about it in terms of how it relates to an existing budget, because the town's going to be bigger, dollars are going to be worth less, tax base is larger, grand list, et cetera. The question is, if you had to pay $1.82 million instead of 991 grand, could the town survive? So an extra 900 grand or 850 grand. If you had to pay that kind of money out in retiree benefits, could you do it? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. My point is you have, basically 40 years to make adjustments to moderate that if you wish to. Now, the moderation could be through changes in benefits. The state talks about doing certain things in terms of changing contribution strategies and eligibility for these benefits. That proposal's been out there for about 18 months and hasn't moved terribly far. Maybe it will. We shall see. But so far it hasn't really gone anywhere. So my point is you can start making adjustments now to do it. Then the obvious question, I know it's a hot topic here as well as everywhere, is should we pre-fund these benefits? It's easy to say we should pre-fund. Everybody likes pre-funding, except for the part about putting up the money. Everybody loves the concept. So the question is, can we do it? Should we do it? What are the pros? What are the cons? There are a lot of different pathways to fund. There is no one size fits all. There's not, you must do it this way, you must do it that way. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get there. One of the ways we see people talk about is let's just fund the normal cost. If we do that, we keep the liability from growing in present value terms. So your liability today is $36 million. Over the next 40 years, it's going to get up to about $180 million or thereabouts. But in today's dollars, it's like $49 million. So it's not, your liability is not going to grow significantly in today's dollars. But if you want to keep it in the $36 million in today's dollars kind of a thing, you have to put about 600 grand a year above and beyond the pay-as-you-go costs. And then people go, well, why would I do that? Well, that's why you would do it. If you decided, I want to have this thing fully funded in 30 years such that I have enough money set aside to pay all benefits related to this plan, you have to put about 900 grand a year for the next 30 years, and that would take care of it, assuming you earn 7% a year. But again, do you have an extra 900 grand lying around? And if so, is that the best use of your money? Because the point is, as you all know, cash is fungible. So 900 grand that you put into this plan is one way to do things. On the other hand, if you said I could put 900 grand into some kind of a tax abatement that gets a major employer to come here and hire lots of people and grow the grand list, that might be a better use of your money. I don't know what your return on capital is, but that's really what you guys have to look at when you make either invest money here, invest money somewhere else. That's really for you folks to decide. So I don't know also what other bonding and capital needs the town may have. If you fund, or at least create a credible plan to fund, S&P, Fitch, and Moody's are likely to look more favorably and give you a better bond rating, depending on exactly how you go about this. But if you're not looking to borrow any money, what do you care what the bond rating is? Now, if you're looking to borrow $100 million for a new school or fire station or whatever, then you probably care a lot about the bond rating. The other side of it is, maybe it's not bond. Maybe it's you just have other capital needs. You're putting in a water treatment plant or who knows what. So you have to look at, you don't want to tie up all your money in this versus something else. And then the question is, okay, OPEB trust, stabilization reserve. Why would we do this? Stabilization reserve is great. We have full flexibility. We can do all kinds of things. Well, two real reasons. One is the OPEB trust assures your employees that there's going to be money set aside to actually pay these benefits 20, 30 years from now. So they get some assurance that there's actually going to be money there as opposed to a future IOU, a promise to pay. However, the stabilization reserve also, those assets can't be considered a GASB 45 asset. And what that means is you don't get the benefit of using a higher discount rate, and the higher discount rate you have, the lower liability we have to show. One of the things that's going on right now, GASB just issued an exposure draft that will be finalized by year end and effective for fiscal 18 for you folks. When that comes into play, as you guys may or may not be familiar with GASB 68 that just impacted the pension plans, it's going to very much mirror GASB 68 in terms of how it's done. So an unfunded plan, you will value that using a 20-year municipal bond index, or right now about 3.45%, as opposed to the 4% we've used here. So your $36 million would be closer to about $40 million thereabouts. If you were to fund, and not necessarily fully fund over 30 years, but sufficiently fund, you can use your long-term rate, which depending on how you invest it, could be 7.5%, depending on how you decide to invest your money. Then the question is, okay, we set aside this trust, it's irrevocable. I can't use the money for anything else. All true. But let's just say 5 years from now, a separate finance committee or board of selectmen comes along and says, these guys in 2014, they were crazy people setting all this money aside. The world has changed. It's a whole different world. We don't want to be doing that anymore. Well, they could at that point decide, we're going to start tapping that to pay the retiree benefits. $900,000 a year, you tap it out. 4 or 5 years, things exhausted, you move on. No harm, no foul, life is fine. The other side people say is, well, what if the state came along and said, this retiree medical, it's insane numbers. Towns can't afford it. We're going to take it all in the state. We're going to take care of it for everybody.
That'll never happen.
The fantasy world, hey, we're living in fantasy world here. So in that fantasy world, let's say that happened, and you've got $20 million, sitting in an OPEB trust. The OPEB trust is irrevocable until the obligation is satisfied. If the obligation is satisfied, that $20 million can come back to you folks. So there is no penalty by virtue of pre-funding in the sense of going, oh, gee, if the liability went away, this money disappears. No, the money comes back to you. Now, again, we don't think that's going to happen in any realistic world, but, people win the lottery, so you never know. So that said, my point about having an OPEB trust, I would say, is this. If you're not going to fund in a material fashion, it's not worth having. And I say that because a lot of people, the word somehow got out on the street 3, 4, 5 years ago that we need to set up a trust because that'll make S&P happy, even if we only put in like $1,000. Well, the problem is a trust has expenses, and you have to cover those expenses. Now, if you have sufficient dollars in there and you're generating 6, 7, 8% a year return, you can cover those expenses. If you've got $1,000, $10,000, $20,000 in there, you're still eating up $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year expenses on a $20,000 balance. It just doesn't make any sense. So, to me, that's not really what they want. What the rating agencies want to see is a plan. And so that plan could be we're going to put in $100,000 a year and increasing it to $25,000 a year. We could put in $200,000 a year until our pension funding is done, and then we'll take the pension funding and add it on there starting in 2033 or 2034. So it's a backloaded approach. We could say it's 1% of payroll. There's a lot of different ways to get there, but what they really want to see is a plan. And my point is the plan is meant to be ongoing, but the key element here is the plans change. And if 5 years from now, the world has changed, we're in a recession, the global finance market is blowing up, you change the plan. This is not supposed to be a suicide pact, it's a responsive document. I would say that the idea here is not to set up a plan that you don't feel you could live with for the next 4 to 5 years, because it's tough to go to S&P. We set up this great plan, give us a ratings bump, and then 18 months from now, well, the plan didn't work. We decided to ditch the plan. That kind of shows a lack of foresight and doesn't really, if anything, you probably get a double negative by the fact of going, these guys can't even plan 18 months in advance. So I think you want to show a little bit of foresight there in terms of what you're doing. And then one of the other exhibits we gave you guys on the third page here is just a couple of your neighbors, just kind of show you some peers. Now, some of these folks are kind of irrelevant to you folks. They're small housing authorities. But across the top, we just kind of show you guys about a $1.5 million normal cost, which means the value of benefits accruing during the year, which is about $3,400 per active employee. So if you think about it, if an active employee is earning $40,000, there's really an extra $3,400 of deferred benefits that they are not receiving in cash. Those benefits will be paid in their retirement. Compared to your peers, City Newburyport, it's about $3,700. Town of Groveland's about $3,400. Hamilton Wenham schools are about $4,800. So you're at the low end of your neighbors, or right in line. If I look at your your benefit payments further to the right, you have about $900,000 and about $4,200 per retiree. Newburyport's about $4,900. Groveland's about $6,000. Hamilton Wenham about $4,000. So again, you guys are at the low end of things. You're not giving away the store here with gold-plated benefits or anything. Your benefits are very much in line with your neighbors, if not below your neighbors. And I can tell you, if I expanded this list to be across the state of Massachusetts, your accrued liability about 137% of payroll, compared to your peers, very much at the low end. We see people, sadly, well above 200% and 300% of payroll. The norm, I would say, in the state, the average is probably about 175, 180. And we keep building up the database as we do more evaluations, so we can certainly give you, better data as we, add more people to the database or give you a larger sample. We just decided to look at Essex County for this purpose, and people who were done really in the last 12 months. So we didn't go back and look at, older evaluations for this. But again, you guys, compared to your peers, are very much, well in line with what your peers are doing, if not on the low end of things.